When it comes to podcasts, I have one rule. I can listen to any episode I want. I just can't subscribe to any show. Before I get into my philosophy and how to implement this rule yourself, let's talk about why we would even need a rule when it comes to our podcast. Just like television and books, there's just so many podcasts to listen to. And if you're like me, it's like a game of whack-a-mole where you're just trying to get through as many episodes as you can, but your list or your feed just keeps piling up. And this is what I call first world stress. And this goes with the same notion of once you start something, you must finish it. I think for books, this really pertains to me, where if I start a book, I feel obligated to finish it, regardless of like the quality of it or if I'm really enjoying the book. And I think this same mentality is sort of seeped into like movies and TV shows and definitely podcasts now, where I feel like I'm kind of like going through a podcast episode and maybe listening to it at like 1.5 or 2 times speed, or going through the timestamps for whatever reason, just so I can feel completed the episode. I listened to that episode of that show. And I think this idea kind of pertains from this like overconsumption we have, where it's so easy to subscribe to a show or bookmark something for later. I think we all have this weird FOMO when it comes to media consumption, that we shouldn't let something fall through the cracks. We should at least like save it so we can at some point listen to it or watch it later. And this save for later notion is just all over the internet, right? Like you can basically save anything. You can save articles, you can save tweets, and people are doing this all the time. They're like basically taking everything they want to consume and putting it into a list that they're gonna eventually look at and read or watch. And I think this mentality of like saving for later makes complete sense, right? It's like, it's convenient. You can watch it or read it on your own time. But I do think we're like way too trigger happy with saving every single thing we see on the internet. And it just like adds a burden on our lives. And I think it also turns into a productivity exercise, at least for me, where I'm not really enjoying like the content. I'm just so focused on blitzing through it, like finishing it and like making it another task on my task list. So my rule around this is really a philosophy and mindset change. So I'm not giving you any sort of hack, but what I'm trying to say is, rather than focusing so much on list-based consumption, try to focus in on what I call the conveyor belt method of consumption, which is rather than focusing so much on like picking everything, letting things kind of pass by and being very selective. So when it comes to media consumption, we do so much in terms of focusing in on putting everything on our plate. It's like a buffet. We put all the items on it and then we sit down and then we have to consume it all. Like there's a burden on us. But instead, we should be thinking of it as like a sushi conveyor belt, where like sushi's passing you, you're being selective, you're picking something, but some things are passing by and maybe you miss something. Maybe it'll come back around, maybe it won't, but like giving in to the idea of like you can't consume everything, because you can't, right? So when it comes specifically to podcasts, what I think we need to focus in on is our actual feed and thinking about the shows we subscribe to, because in a way, the feed is really the list. Shows just automatically get downloaded and they're in our feed to consume. So here's the tactical approach that I do that I'm recommending to you. Go ahead and grab your phone, go to your podcast player of choice, and go ahead and look at the number of shows you've subscribed to and dwindle it down to anywhere from like 2 to 4 shows. And this is gonna depend on if you have shows that you know, refresh daily or weekly or monthly, but kind of stick within the 2 to 4 range, like the shows that you really, really like, but everything else needs to be unsubscribed. And step 2 is really the foundational step, which is don't restrict yourself from listening to any episode you want to, but you have to take that intentional step of searching for that show and then playing it or adding it to your queue versus just letting it automatically come into your feed. And what I find is when I do this, there aren't a bunch of shows that are just like waiting for me to listen to, and rather I have to go search for shows. And it does a couple things here. It makes me more selective of what episodes I'll listen to, because I have to take that extra effort of finding an episode or a show that I want to listen to. The second thing it does is it adds more variety to the podcasts I listen to. So if you have like 20 podcast shows that you listen to, and there's so many, you won't really explore and search for other shows. And I think this is really good to get a variety of podcasts that you want to listen to and not be so stuck with listening to the same ones over and over again. So the example I have is a podcast called Deep Questions with Cal Newport. I'm sort of a productivity addict, and it's one of those shows where callers ask him questions about their productivity and he gives them advice, which is really, really fun. I enjoy listening to the podcast, but it's just like not worth listening to every single episode. So I've unsubscribed to his podcast. Sorry, Cal. And I'll just like go in once every couple of weeks and see what questions people have asked, and then I'll maybe listen to one episode to just get my productivity fix. But I don't feel like a burden now to listen to every single episode that he puts out. And I think this is really important. I think this is the way to really get a hold and get control of our media consumption. Again, I'm trying to apply this to podcasts, but it can be applied to really any sort of content. Like, let some of the stuff go, and it'll really take the burden off you. And I feel like there has been a burden lifted off my shoulders, because now I don't focus so much on getting through a podcast. I really focus on just like listening to it and being like, is this good quality information? Am I enjoying it? So there you go. Try this out. Let me know what you think and tell me if it makes a difference in your life. Okay, take care of yourself, and I'll see you guys in the next one.